China is for China. China is not for Africa. How can an African be a foreigner in an African country? To gain mentality, we need to let go of the influence of the West, who were still colonized under white supremacists. Good day, all. Good day, wherever you are, my awesome people, my awesomeness, my peps, my Africans. Welcome to FKU Africa podcast, and this is your host, Maneza F8. So, yeah, man, I appreciate all your subscribers, all your comments, all your likes, and most especially on Facebook, FKU Africa podcast page. It's been amazing. We have daily content that is being um, published in a ways of videos, images, and some text, just all about Pan Africanism. So yeah, so today, without further ado, let's get to the topic of this day. So yeah, today we're gonna be discussing Pan Africanism, Pan Africanist. So however you wanna put it, on whichever context you're putting it. So, what is Pan Africanism? What is being a Pan Africanist? So, there are a number of ways you would articulate to this point. You would say Pan Africanism is a way of life. It's the way of life of proud and Africans that are into one Africa first, a united Africa with no borders. So that's the way of life of those Africans and Pan Africanist. It would be referred to a person who is living that way of life of a Pan Africanist. And Pan African it's also the same as referred to an individual. So yeah, so we want to discuss more on what is this Pan African, how this came about, and what it is all about going forward. So there are many arguments on who started it, where did it come from, where did it originate from. So we want to share lights on some of the events, important events of Pan-Africanism. There are a number of people who are known as Pan-Africanists and were credited as the founders of Pan-Africanism. So one would say that Pan-Africanism and the first meeting was in 1800s. Some would say was in 1900s. It's up to you on your search or on your knowledge or on your reading on how do you think or how do you prefer which one was the pivotal role uh, and the game changer for the Pan Africanism. So I would say, according to what I know, the meetings have been happening throughout 1800s. People have been gathering mostly in private because they were scared of being found out by oppressors and being killed. So many meetings have been happening in behind closed doors, and more especially in countries like London, like America, United States of America. There are a number of meetings that were happening behind closed doors that led to the pivotal role of the first known meeting that was around 1897. And some of those meetings were organized by a number of intellectual black people, women and men. Not only men, women and men were involved. And one of those people was Henry Sylvester Williams, and also uh, W.E.B. Du Bois. So I call him Webb. Is the famous author. He's got a nice book that's titled "Soul of a Black Folks." I read that book a while ago. It's very interesting. So I've came to learn about his role in the formation of a Pan-African meetings, and he was one of the people that would write the invitation letters and articles that would attract many Africans around the world to form an African diaspora around all the other nations that black people were largely slaved at. So Mr. Du Bois and Henry Sylvester organized the meeting, which was known that legitimized Pan-Africanism in 1900. And that meeting was very important because that meeting led to the series of meetings that led to the freeing of some of the African countries, that led to taking over of the new breeds, the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, Haile Selassie, Jomo Kenyatta, and all those guys. So those meetings were held strategically. That meeting, the first one was held in London. That lasted for 3 days. And that meeting was chaired by Bishop Alexandra Walters. And that treaty was not just for Africans to look at each other and smile at each other. It was a meeting of pain, seeing the suffering of black people all around the world. It was painful for them to watch black people being enslaved and be suffering in their land, some scattered around the world, running away from the colonizers, from the ruthless of the pale people. So those meetings were strategized in a way to discuss the independence of Africa, the united of Africans around the world, trying to make sure that Africans who are lost around the world are coming back to Africa. Most of them, they still knew their roots. Some of them, they didn't know. But in those series of meetings, millions of Africans came back to Africa, and some of them, they migrated to Liberia. So it was not just a congress like in these days, people just to go and eat there and shake hands and go back without anything of value come out of it. So the second one was in 1919, which was in Paris, and that one was also as important. The third one was in 1923, and in 1923 there were a series of meetings. They were also in Paris, London, and Brussels. Those meetings, they included a UK, a Caribbean, United States, West Indies, Samoa, and some of other countries that had Africans were inhabited of those countries. And there were a series of meetings throughout and up until 1945. And those meetings play a pivotal role on freeing of the first African country, which was Ghana. Ghana was the first independent country other than Ethiopia, which was already been liberated, which was already free because it was never colonized. So from there, in 1945, we see a lot of shift in the perspective of leadership. Some would say the first people to rally the United States of Africa was the likes of Marcus Garvey, in his famous words, was the likes of Edward Blayden. That gentleman, he was breeding Pan-Africanism. He was living Pan-Africanism. He was born in Virgin Islands around 1800s, I think 1856, and went to change his citizenship to Sierra Leone, where he died around 1919 or 1912 or so, around those years. So throughout those years, he was emphasizing and playing important roles in spreading the word of African unity. So you say Africa must unite. He said it way before everyone said it. Marcus Garvey said it way before everyone said it. Malcolm X said it way before everyone said it. Martin Luther King Jr. said it way before everyone said it. Duse Muhammad Ali said it way before everyone said it. Bob Marley said it way before everyone said it. So whoever was the first doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who was the first to come out with the Pan-Africanism or Pan-Africanist. It doesn't matter. What matters is what are we doing with that now? what has it done from then up until now, the importance of Pan-African. We cannot run away from the fact that the only movement that played a pivotal role in freeing of African people and African countries was Pan-Africanism, because people were rallying behind the idea of one Africa. And all these people that I mentioned, they passed away. And their idea of one Africa died with them. It's a shame that when most countries became then independent from the white people, from the white supremacists, from the oppressors, most of the people then went in to become their countrymen. The statesmen then, they were so amazed about the respect that they would get and the gun salutes that they would get when they are visiting other European countries, and the respect as the presidents. They forgot about one thing that was important in the fight for that independence: one Africa. It's one Africa that they forgot about until they realize that it is important for Africa to unite. Suffering in Africa will still prevail. So from that time, Ghana was freed, and just after that, in 1958, the president of Ghana then, which was Kwame Nkrumah, organized an African Congress. In that Congress, there were only countries who were still independent back then. So he organized another one in 1960, yes, and that one led to the formation of OAU in 1960. I will deal with OAU in another video because it's a broad concept as it is. So I won't explain much about OAU. So when OAU was formed, that's when the idea of Pan-African was lost in the people who were in the presidents. Because at that time in Addis Ababa, 1963, OAU is formed, and at that time, President Kwame Nkrumah, he was voted for the formation of one governance in Africa. So they opt for regions instead, which we have now, which is useless, which we have Southern Africa, West Africa, North Africa, Central Africa, and East Africa. Those regions, they didn't do anything to help the broader Africa. They didn't do anything to help the poverty in Africa. They didn't do anything to liberate themselves from the West. They didn't do anything to gain their financial freedom. So the start of OAU was the time where the dream of the previous leaders, fighters, activists died. Up until today, OAU has not accomplished anything until they changed the name in 2002 to AU. Nothing happened. The only thing that there was a movement was when Muammar Gaddafi was in rails. Around 2006 and 2007, there were a series of summits then to form a commission to see how they are going to move forward to the formation of a One Africa that was going to be established in 2015. But before that dream of Muammar Gaddafi was realized, they killed him. They killed him because why? They know that if you unite, you are stronger. But as divided as we are now, we are weaker. When I'm saying they, I'm referring to pale people. I'm referring to the oppressors of Africa. I'm referring to the systemic racism, which is white supremacist. The white supremacist was designed for a black person to not value himself, the next black person next to him, and everything that is done by a black person. The white supremacists, they didn't just came here to oppress us. They came here to oppress our minds. Our minds is oppressed in a way that you would think a brother from Zambia is a foreigner. We are oppressed in a way that you would think a brother from Sierra Leone, from Djibouti, from Guinea-Bissau, from Nigeria, from Morocco, from Egypt is a foreigner in your country. That's how oppressed we still are. Put on a picture of about 20 kids in Facebook and I say choose which one is from Guinea, which one is from Zambia, which one is from Nigeria. They are all black kids with the same uniform. No one can do it. Why? Because we're the same. A black person in Egypt, a black person in China, a black person in UK, a black person in Russia, a black person in America is still the same black person from Africa. So whatever you think about Africanism, you must think the people that died in that name and the fight that they fought. They fought for what? For one Africa, the United African States. They will never give it away easily. These presidents that we have now, they will never give the ruling away because it's so nice for them. They are enriching themselves every day. But that's not the case if and when, because it's going to happen when one Africa is realized and is governed by one government. It's not that they're going to lose whatever they have. They will still govern the states that they are in. They will still govern those states. They will still run those states. But the process will be much different from where it is now. So what we must do, Africans, we must put people into power, people who are pushing one Africa, people who are Pan-Africanist, people who are socialist, people who are pushing no borders, one currency, one Africa, and one love. This is what we need to do. People have died because of this concept of Pan-Africanism. People have died. A number of them have died, have been assassinated. I'm talking about the likes of Thomas Sankara, the likes of Muammar Gaddafi, Kwame Nkrumah, Steve Biko, Chris Hani, and Mr. Nyobe, and more. There are many more. Patrice Lumumba. There are many of them that have died in the name of Pan-Africanism. And those people, they didn't just die in vain. We still gonna fight for it as the youth of this time. We're gonna fight for one Africa, and it will happen. It will happen either you like it or not. It will happen. We still have some Pan-Africanists even now in our midst, but they are not as, I would say, articulate and effective as the people who were rallying for Pan-Africanism then. We still have the president of EFF, Julius Malema. We still have in Zimbabwe, Chamisa, Atam Tambara. We still have in which is this Kenya, IOP. We still have some of the people who are still very strong and vocal about Pan-Africanism, and we will not forget about the old ones, about the ones that have passed, but we need to focus on those ones that we still have now that are pushing for Africa with no borders. I'm not talking for any party. I'm not representing any party. I'm not in any party. I'm talking as a Pan-Africanist. I'm talking about the person who's got a dream of one Africa. I'm talking as a person who's got a dream for a flourishing Africa. I'm talking as a person who's got a dream for the Africa which doesn't beg. I'm talking as a person who's got a dream of Africa that competes with the markets of every country in the world. I'm talking about the Africa that will have the most and all the resources being digged here, developed here, and polished here and sold around the world that we have. That's the Africa we're fighting for. So yeah, through all that stuff, there were also women. Men and women have fought. Men and women were in those congresses, conferences, meetings. Their names are not much documented, but there are some names that you can look out for, like Claudia Jones, Alice Kinloch, Winnie Madikizela. There's quite a lot of the women. I will have to have another episode about the roles that women played in the Pan-African movement. So yeah, in closing, I would say the struggle continues, Africa. The people that died, they didn't die for nothing. Comrades who died, they didn't die in vain. We will realize that dream. It will happen. Either they like it, either not, but it will happen. We will realize one African state. We will realize the United African States. We will realize an Africa where is run by one government. We will realize Africa which got its own language. We will realize the Africa which got its own financial currency. We will realize the Africa which got one football team. We will realize the Africa which got one anthem. We will realize the Africa which got one flag. We will realize the Africa we need and Africa we want. I thank you. Please subscribe and go check the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Search for FKU Africa Podcast. Follow it and leave a comment. It's important. Subscribe. I thank you. Fikiria kwa undani, ndugu. Asante. Tsamaku.
Ikabuthethi umala ngithethi inkcubeko yenhlanga ngenhlanga. Belaphi yami ndiyayazi, so I know where I'm going.